She screamed his name in a hotel room, thinking it was passion, but it was the beginning of her nightmare. Avery Quinn thought she'd found connection in a stranger's arms, but what followed was betrayal, manipulation, and a fight for her life. Left with bruises and silence, she didn't crumble, she rose. What started as trauma became a movement. Her revenge? Justice. Her weapon? Truth. You won't believe how one woman turned her pain into power and brought a monster to his knees. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit the soul. The city's summer heat clung to everything, thick like a second skin. Avery Quinn stood at the check-in counter of the Sterling Manor Hotel, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her, her fingers drumming the marble surface, not out of impatience, but out of need. Need to not think. After all, this getaway wasn't for pleasure. It was an escape, a surrender disguised as self-care. A weekend alone, no emails, no exes, no reminders that she had just quit a job that drained her spirit and walked away from a man who forgot her birthday 3 years in a row. Room 508, the receptionist smiled, sliding her a key card. Top floor. Quiet. Exactly what she wanted. Avery nodded, offering a tight smile before wheeling her bag to the elevator. The Sterling was beautiful in an old-money kind of way. Arched ceilings, velvet rugs, ornate chandeliers that dripped like icicles from above. She imagined this was where people came to have affairs, not breakdowns. Still, the irony didn't bother her. She didn't come to feel better. She came to feel something. The elevator opened to a hallway cloaked in shadows and lavender-scented silence. Her heels echoed softly as she walked to the room. Inside, the lights were dim and golden. The bed looked impossibly soft. She dropped her bag, peeled off her shoes, and collapsed onto the mattress, arms spread wide like a starfish stranded on land. Hours passed. The sun dipped behind the skyline, bleeding orange and gold through the sheer curtains. Avery stood by the window, sipping a glass of rosé from the minibar, watching the world blur below. Her thoughts drifted, slowly, then sharply. Memories she didn't invite surfacing without mercy. Her boss's voice, her ex's laugh, the way her mother used to look at her when disappointed. All too familiar ghosts. A knock startled her. She turned. It wasn't housekeeping. Not this late. Avery padded to the door, her bare feet silent against the carpet. She peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, leaning slightly to one side, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a room key card. His face was half in shadow, but something about him made her stomach flip, not with fear, but something more dangerous. She opened the door an inch. "Yes? Sorry," he said, his voice smooth, casual. "I think I got the wrong room. Yours is 508? She blinked. "Yeah." He glanced at his card, then chuckled softly. "They gave me 509. I guess I just misread it. Long day." She nodded, starting to close the door, but he smiled, a soft, sideways thing that made her hesitate. "I'm Damien," he said. "You here for the conference too?" "No," she replied. "Just time off." His eyebrows lifted, curious. "Lucky. Well, if you feel like grabbing a drink downstairs, there's a nice little bar in the lobby, in case you get tired of being alone with your thoughts." And just like that, he walked away. Avery stood frozen for a moment, his voice still echoing in her ears. She told herself not to go. She told herself this was how bad decisions began. But maybe a bad decision was exactly what she needed. Something reckless. Something to burn away the numbness. 20 minutes later, she was in the bar, dressed in a simple black slip dress that fell just above her knees. Her hair, still damp from a quick rinse, curled naturally down her back. Damien sat at the far end of the bar, sipping an old-fashioned. He smiled when he saw her, as if he knew she'd come. "Didn't think I'd see you," he said as she slid onto the stool beside him. "I surprised myself too." They talked. God, did they talk? About music, old cities, the strange pressure of being alive in your late 20s and not having it all figured out. Damien was funny without trying, clever without arrogance. He listened, not like men who waited for their turn to speak, but like someone genuinely interested in the spaces between her words. 2 drinks in, Avery was laughing in a way she hadn't in months. He leaned closer, brushing his fingers against her wrist as he made a point, and electricity bloomed where he touched. It was subtle, but deliberate. By the time they stepped into the elevator together, something unspoken had already been decided. She should have gone to her room alone. But when the doors opened at the 5th floor, and he followed her instead of turning to his, she didn't stop him. When he stood behind her at her door, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck, she didn't step away. And when she turned the key card and let him in, the air between them pulsed like a current. Inside, the room felt warmer than before. Damien turned to her slowly. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I'm done being sure." His mouth was on hers before the sentence finished. It wasn't gentle, it was ravenous, like he'd been starving for her and only just realized it. Her back hit the wall, her hands tangling in his hair. He tasted like whiskey and secrets, and every kiss felt like a question she didn't need to answer. Clothes fell in a trail toward the bed. Her dress slipped down like silk from her shoulders. He kissed down her neck, her chest, her stomach, reverent at first, then demanding. She moaned, not from pleasure alone, but from the emotional crack opening inside her. It had been too long. She hadn't known how much she needed this. To be wanted, to be touched. "God," he whispered, "you're beautiful." She didn't reply. Her heart was beating too loud. When he entered her, her breath caught, her eyes shut, and then she screamed. Not in fear, not yet, but in surprise, in release, in something deeper than she could name. The bed shook beneath them, rhythm building like thunder, and she clung to him like he was a lifeline. Every thrust chipped away at the ice that encased her for years. Every whisper from his lips pulled her further into the fire. Time melted. Only sensation remained. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets soaked in sweat, Damien brushed hair from her face, his touch tender. "I didn't expect this," he murmured. "Neither did I," she said. He kissed her forehead, then rose to pour himself a glass of water. Avery stared at the ceiling, dazed, her body aching in a way that felt oddly sacred. But beneath the euphoria, something stirred. A question. A tremble of doubt. She rolled onto her side, watching him from across the room. He looked different now, a little too calm, a little too unreadable. She shook it off, told herself she was being paranoid, told herself not every fire ends in ash. But a voice deep in her gut whispered, "This isn't the end, it's the beginning." Of what she didn't know. Only that the air in the room had shifted subtly, like the moment before a storm breaks. And part of her, the part still clinging to warmth and want, chose to ignore it. Just for tonight. Because tonight, she was fire. She was voice. She was alive. The moon hung low above the city, silver and swollen, casting a dreamy glow across the skyline that filtered softly through the hotel room curtains. The silence in room 508 wasn't quiet at all. It was thick, brimming, pulsing with something raw and electric. The kind of silence that came before the crash of thunder, or a confession too loud to be whispered. And in that silence, Avery Quinn felt her heart stammer in her chest, breath catching somewhere between anticipation and fear. Damien returned from the minibar with a second drink, his bare chest rising and falling as if he'd just run a marathon, though the only thing racing was the current between them. His body was sculpted like it belonged in another life, one where he wasn't a stranger in her room, and she wasn't someone who promised herself she'd never do this again. But here he was. And here she was. Naked except for the sheet clinging to her thighs and the heat curling inside her belly like smoke. "You okay?" he asked, voice low and rough like gravel soaked in honey. She nodded slowly. "Are you?" A crooked grin danced across his lips. "I'm better than I've been in years." Avery tried to smile, but it faltered. There was something behind his eyes, a glint that flickered too fast to name, but the wine in her veins whispered lies that sounded a lot like comfort. "It's just a fling. He's just a man. You needed this." He set the glass on the nightstand and crawled back into bed, covering her body with his own. His weight was warm, familiar already, as if this wasn't the first time their skin had memorized each other. He kissed her again, slower now, more deliberate, and the ache inside her bloomed wider. Her hands roamed his back, fingers trailing over muscle and scars. One of them curved just beneath his shoulder blade, jagged and faint. She traced it with her nail. "Where'd this come from?" she whispered. "Motorcycle accident. A long time ago." "You still ride?" He leaned down to kiss her collarbone. "Not anymore. Got tired of near-death experiences. Prefer slow burns these days." Avery chuckled softly. "This doesn't feel slow." Damien tilted his head, eyes darkening. "Would you like it to be?" Before she could answer, his lips traveled south again, retracing paths already burned into her skin. She moaned as he kissed the inside of her thigh, his hands pressing her hips into the bed, mouth teasing then claiming. Her body arched under him, muscles trembling, and the air filled with the sound of her name falling from his lips like a prayer and a curse all at once. There was an edge to the way he touched her, reverent yet ravenous. It was as though he was trying to devour something invisible beneath her skin, searching for every secret she'd buried there. His fingers curled around her wrists, holding them above her head as he kissed her deeply, the sheets twisting around their legs like vines. Every moan was met with a growl, every gasp answered by a deeper thrust. She had never felt so seen and so owned all at once, and she let him take. She gave freely, as if her body were a language, and he was the only one fluent in it. But somewhere in the haze, guilt slithered in, thin and quiet like smoke under a door. Avery wasn't the kind of woman who slept with strangers. At least she didn't think she was. But with every second that passed, she realized how far she'd drifted from the person she used to be. The person who kept her heart guarded, her legs crossed, her emotions locked behind glass. That woman had been lonely, careful, forgotten. Damien didn't forget. He watched her like she mattered. He touched her like she was made of fire. And as his voice whispered filthy, beautiful things into her ear, words that made her blush and melt and come undone, she believed for a moment that this could be something real. Or if not real, at least real enough. But behind every moan, guilt threaded through her chest like a wire pulled tighter with each breath. She shouldn't feel this alive. Not with him. Not with someone she barely knew. Not with someone who had eyes like secrets and hands like chains. Still, she did. She felt it with every part of her. She screamed his name as though it had always belonged on her lips. And when he whispered hers back, it sounded like a promise, one that would shatter by morning. By the third time, her throat was raw. Sweat slicked between their bodies, sheets damp with desire and desperation. She lay curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat like it held answers. But it was just a rhythm, just muscle and blood. Nothing steady. Nothing she could trust. Damien brushed his fingers through her hair. "You're incredible," he murmured. She didn't respond. Her body felt like it had been carved open and remade. But her heart was pacing in circles, asking questions her body refused to answer. The room dimmed further. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees beyond the windows. And for the first time since she let him in, Avery felt cold. She pulled the sheet tighter around herself, turning onto her side to face the window. "Why are you here?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. He was silent for a moment too long. "Work? A deal I'm closing tomorrow." She nodded, but something in his tone sounded off. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "Are you married?" she asked next, her voice flat. He laughed lightly, like she'd just told a joke. "No, I'm not that kind of cliché." She turned back toward him slowly. "But there's someone else, isn't there?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Why would you say that?" "I don't know, just a feeling." He leaned in and kissed her softly. "Don't ruin the night." And she let the topic drop, not because she believed him, but because she didn't want the truth just yet. She wanted a few more minutes of the illusion. They dozed on and off, wrapped in silence and shadow. Time stopped meaning anything. At some point, she woke and watched him sleeping. He looked peaceful, even beautiful. His features relaxed, his body curled toward hers protectively. But even in that stillness, something didn't sit right. It was in the way his hand still gripped her wrist, even in sleep. It was in the way her name sounded too practiced on his lips. It was in the way her instincts, buried for years, screamed that she'd made a mistake. And yet when he stirred beside her and pulled her close again, when his mouth found her neck and his hand slid down her thigh once more, she didn't stop him. She closed her eyes and gave in to the fire one more time. Because for one night, she didn't want to be smart. She didn't want to be careful. She wanted to burn. The morning arrived quietly, slipping through the curtains like a thief. Pale light crept across the bed, painting lines over tangled limbs and wrinkled sheets. Avery stirred first. Her head felt heavy, her throat dry, her body sore in a way that left her unsure whether it was pleasure or consequence. Damien still slept beside her, one arm flung carelessly over her waist, as though she belonged there, as though nothing had changed. But something had. She could feel it in the air, that odd stillness, the kind that doesn't comfort, but warns. She slid out from under his arm slowly, careful not to wake him. The sheet clung to her bare skin as she tiptoed toward the bathroom. She didn't turn on the light, just stared at her reflection in the dim mirror. Her hair was wild, her lips slightly swollen, faint marks trailed across her collarbone. His fingerprints, his mouth, his memory now etched into her skin. She splashed water on her face, trying to erase something she couldn't name. What did she expect? That one night with a stranger would somehow fill all the hollow parts inside her? That the way he held her meant something deeper than heat and skin? She sighed and turned back toward the room. Damien was awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, shirtless, scrolling through his phone. The moment he saw her, he clicked the screen off and smiled. Too fast, too easy. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice thick with charm. "Hey," she replied softly. She walked toward the armchair to grab her robe, and out of the corner of her eye, saw the screen on his phone light up again. She wasn't trying to look. She didn't want to pry, but the message flashed clearly before it dimmed. "Celine? Did you tell her yet? I miss you." Time didn't freeze, but it might as well have. Avery's stomach dropped so fast she felt physically sick. Her hand, reaching for the robe, paused in midair. Her skin suddenly felt too cold, too tight. Every breath tasted sour. "Who's Celine?" she asked, keeping her voice as steady as possible. Damien didn't flinch. "What?" "I saw the text." He stood up slowly, stretching like a man who hadn't just been caught mid-lie. "Oh, that? Just complicated." Avery wrapped the robe around her and tied the belt tight enough to feel it in her ribs. "Complicated like she's your ex? Or complicated like you're still with her?" He shrugged. "Look, Avery, last night was amazing, okay? But I didn't come here to talk about someone else." She stared at him, his coolness, his refusal to even pretend to be sorry. "You lied." "I didn't lie," he said, stepping closer. "You didn't ask." Her eyes narrowed. "I did. Last night. I asked if you were married. And I said I wasn't, which is true." "Then what is she? Your girlfriend?" Damien's jaw flexed. "She's someone I've been trying to end things with. It's messy." Avery turned away, grabbing her phone and charger. "Right. So I'm just the in-between." He reached for her arm. Not rough, but firm. "Don't be like that." She yanked her wrist free. "Don't touch me." His expression darkened, a flicker of irritation surfacing beneath the mask. "Look, you're taking this way too seriously. It was one night." "One night?" she echoed bitterly. "Right, just one night." She gathered her things quickly, stuffing clothes into her bag with shaky hands. She didn't want to cry in front of him. Not again. Not after everything her body had confessed to him, everything she'd let him take without ever stopping to ask what he was giving back. Because now she knew. Nothing. He gave her nothing. She reached for the door, but Damien stepped in front of it. "You're really just going to walk out like this?" "Yes." His lips curled slightly, not into a smile but something crueler. "After all that screaming last night, you sure you don't want another round?" She froze. Not because she was tempted, but because of the way he said it. Like her pleasure belonged to him. Like what had happened wasn't mutual but a transaction, a performance, a conquest. Her voice was low when she answered. "Move, Damien." He didn't. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I get it. You feel used. But don't pretend you didn't want it. You were practically begging for it." Her palm itched. Her jaw clenched. "I did want it. I trusted you. And that's your mistake, not mine." The words hit harder than a slap. Avery took a deep breath, locking eyes with him. "I'll say this once. Get out of my way." Damien smirked. "Or what?" She didn't answer with words. She dropped her bag, took 2 steps back, and with everything in her, shoved him in the chest. Hard. He stumbled slightly, caught off guard, and she used that second to reach for the doorknob. He caught her wrist again, tighter this time. "Don't touch me," she shouted. "Calm down," he hissed, his grip tightening. "You're being dramatic." The word dramatic lit a fire in her. She wrenched free and stepped back. "You lied to me, you manipulated me, and now you're trying to gaslight me? Screw you." He tilted his head. "God, you're loud." She laughed bitterly. "You liked that about me last night." He opened the door for her then, stepping aside with a mocking bow. By all means, go cry in the hallway. Just don't forget to tell the whole floor how good I made you feel." Avery didn't look at him as she walked past, didn't speak, didn't breathe until the door clicked shut behind her. But in the hallway, she collapsed against the wall. Her heart wasn't just broken, it was humiliated. Her skin still smelled like him. Her body still throbbed with the echo of his name. And now, it all felt like a lie. She wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear her. No one, except the woman on the other end of that text. Celine. She stared down at her phone, Damien's name still in her call log. Her fingers hovered over the screen, but she didn't call him. She didn't block him either. Not yet. Instead, she sat there in the hallway of the hotel where she'd given away too much too fast and felt everything all at once. Rage, embarrassment, shame. But beneath it all, a seed of something darker. Revenge. Because the worst part wasn't that he used her. The worst part was that he thought she'd forget it. But she wouldn't. Avery Quinn had screamed for him. Now she would make sure the world heard what he'd done. Avery didn't cry as she rode the elevator down. She didn't scream or curse. Instead, she stood still, clutching her bag against her chest, her eyes fixed on the glowing numbers counting down slowly from 5 to 1. Her heart wasn't beating fast anymore. It had settled into something slower, heavier, like a drum muffled beneath water, like grief, learning how to breathe. The lobby was empty when the doors slid open. Morning light poured through the massive windows, casting golden shadows across the marble floor. She didn't glance at the receptionist, didn't stop for coffee, didn't care if her robe was slightly askew or her cheeks blotchy. She just walked out, shoes clicking rhythmically, echoing behind her like ghosts. Outside, the heat had already begun to rise. The city was awake, unaware of what had unraveled upstairs. Cars moved, birds chirped. A jogger passed her, smiling politely. None of them knew what had happened in room 508. None of them knew that Avery Quinn had walked in, craving something soft, and walked out bruised in ways invisible but aching. She called for a ride and waited in silence, her fingers trembling slightly as they scrolled through nothing on her phone. She couldn't think clearly, couldn't process what had just happened. All she knew was that she had to get out of there. But the escape didn't come. Not really. Because 2 hours later, she found herself back in her apartment, standing in the shower with the water too hot, scrubbing her skin until it turned red. Her body stung, but the heat didn't cleanse her. The scent of him still clung to her. Cologne, whiskey, sex, betrayal. It was everywhere, in her sheets, in her hair, in her memory. She sat on the shower floor, letting the water crash over her like rain, and finally, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet sobs, shuddering through her ribs like small earthquakes. She didn't cry because she missed him. She cried because she let him in. Because she believed him. Because for a brief moment, she'd thought she mattered. But the deeper pain came not from him. It came from the echo of her own voice, screaming his name. From the way her body had betrayed her, responding with pleasure to a man who was already halfway out the door before she even closed her eyes. Over the next 2 days, Avery barely moved. She canceled plans, ignored calls, and buried herself under blankets with curtains drawn and lights off. Food lost its taste. Time lost its meaning. The world outside became a blur of noise she wanted no part of. And then the nightmare twisted. On the third night, as she lay staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed. Blocked number. She hesitated, heart already racing. Another buzz. A message this time. "You were amazing. Too bad it didn't last." Her stomach turned. Before she could respond or scream, the next message came. "You moaned like you meant it. Don't pretend now." She blocked the number immediately, hands shaking, throat closing. The air grew thinner around her, as though the walls were closing in. But it wasn't over. Over the next few days, the messages came from different numbers, each one crueler, more graphic than the last. Some praising her, some shaming her, all unmistakably from Damien. Or someone he had enlisted to torment her. She didn't know which was worse. Panic set in. She stopped sleeping. Every time the phone buzzed, her chest tightened. She jumped at shadows, startled at every creak in the hallway. She considered changing her number, but deep down she knew, even if she disappeared, he wouldn't stop. And then came the worst night. She was dozing off, curled up on the couch with the TV still glowing faint blue, when she heard it. A knock at the door. Soft, slow, repeating. 3 knocks. She froze, checked the time. 3:17 a.m. Her breath caught. Another knock. She tiptoed to the peephole. No one, but on the floor was a single rose. Red, fresh, its stem wrapped in black thread. She didn't scream, not out loud. Instead, she locked the door, slid the chain across, and backed away, hands trembling uncontrollably. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen with a knife in her lap, waiting for morning, waiting for the sun to tell her it was safe again. And when daylight finally returned, she made a decision. No more hiding. No more pretending she wasn't afraid. She grabbed her laptop and started writing. Not a diary, not a confession, but a record. Every text, every call, every knock, every word she remembered from that night. She detailed the way his fingers dug into her wrist, the look in his eyes when she tried to leave, the pressure in his voice, the threats, the shame, the manipulation. She wrote until her fingers ached and her throat dried. And then she backed it all up, onto hard drives, cloud storage, multiple folders, all hidden with passwords only she knew. She wasn't ready to go to the police. Not yet. Not until she had more. Not until she could bury him the way he tried to bury her. But she needed something. Closure? Justice? Control? Maybe just a way to breathe again. So she returned to the Sterling Manor Hotel. Dressed in all black, sunglasses pulled low, voice calm and polite. "I'd like to request security footage from last weekend," she told the front desk clerk, flashing her ID and pressing gently on the fading bruise around her wrist. "There was a disturbance. I'd like to speak with your manager." She played it smart, never raising her voice. Never accusing, just planting seeds, and it worked. The manager reviewed the records, found timestamps, footage. A woman running barefoot down the hallway, visibly shaken. A man shouting, trying to follow, stopped by security. They offered an apology. She asked for a copy and left with it in her purse, heart beating steadier than it had in days. But still, she wasn't done. She opened a blank file on her computer and labeled it Project Red Rose. Because the next time Damien reached out, the next time he tried to break her, she'd be ready. No more screaming in silence. No more hiding in shame. The next scream would be loud, public, and unforgettable. The days blurred together like watercolors left out in the rain. Avery barely noticed the sun rising or setting anymore. Her apartment remained dim and quiet, the curtains drawn against a world she no longer trusted. She moved through her space like a ghost, silent, methodical. But something inside her had changed, shifted from broken to sharp, from grief to grit. She wasn't healing, not in the way others expected her to. She wasn't journaling or meditating or eating well. No, Avery Quinn was planning. Every night, she opened her laptop, revisited the folder she named Project Red Rose, and added to it. The document was no longer just a list of facts. It had become a timeline, a case file, a living map of the man who had branded himself across her body and then tried to disappear like smoke. But she saw him, clearly now. The veil had lifted, and beneath the charm and lies stood something far more dangerous. Damien Wolfe wasn't a mistake. He was a pattern. And patterns could be traced. She started with her own experience, dates, times, screenshots, voicemails. Then she moved outward, scouring his social media. He hadn't blocked her. Arrogance, perhaps, or carelessness. Either way, she found what she was looking for. Celine, the woman from the message. Her profile was full of curated perfection. Couple photos, filtered selfies, love quotes that now felt like punchlines. Avery stared at those pictures and wondered what Celine really knew. Had she been fed the same sweet poison? Had she ever screamed into a pillow after he left? Or was she still asleep inside the illusion? Avery created a burner account and followed her. Watched, waited. It didn't take long. Within days, Celine posted a story. Damien's hand, unmistakable, with that faint scar near the knuckle, resting on her knee at what looked like an upscale rooftop bar. Caption, "Second chances. Sometimes they're worth it." Avery nearly threw her phone across the room. Second chances? She was bleeding in the dark while he toasted champagne with the woman who likely had no idea he left a different bed soaked in sweat and silence only weeks ago. But instead of rage, Avery felt something colder, clearer. This wasn't about jealousy. This wasn't about wanting him back. This was about exposing him, making sure no one else walked into the fire she barely escaped from. And she knew now she couldn't do it alone. So she took a risk. She reached out. It started with a simple post on a private forum for women, anonymous, encrypted, discreet. The title read, "Has anyone else survived a man like this?" She described Damien without naming him. His charm, his control, his cruelty disguised as charisma. She mentioned the hotel, the manipulation, the way her body said yes while her heart screamed no. At first there was silence, then the replies came. "I thought it was just me. He told me I was crazy when I tried to leave. I have pictures of the bruises, same name, same scar, same lies." Avery stared at the screen, heart pounding. Dozens of women. Some had met him under different names, some had stayed longer, some had barely escaped. But the story was the same. Damien Wolf was a predator, a shapeshifter, a man who wore love like a mask and stripped it away when no one was looking. She connected with them privately, chats that started cautious and ended in tears and solidarity. They shared receipts, audio recordings, private messages, even photos. One woman had a restraining order. Another had tried to press charges, but withdrew after he threatened her job. And suddenly, Avery wasn't just a victim. She was part of a movement. They created a group, secure, locked down, with no real names, just initials and truth. They called themselves the Red Circle, after the flower he'd left at Avery's door. What once terrified her now became their symbol of resistance. Together they built a timeline, a profile, a master file. They spoke to a lawyer, one who specialized in abuse and digital harassment. The woman listened quietly, then leaned back and said, "We have a case, but it's going to take guts." Avery didn't hesitate. "We've got those." The lawyer helped them organize their evidence. Not just personal testimonies, but hotel footage, medical reports, financial transactions, text records. All of it. Each detail clicked into place like a puzzle that now revealed the monster behind the man. And while the legal gears began to turn, Avery planned her next move. She knew Damien was vain. He loved attention, especially in the right circles. So when news broke about a high-profile charity gala hosted by one of his company's major investors, she knew he'd be there. He'd never turn down a chance to be seen, praised, celebrated. Perfect. She found a dress, crimson, sleek, backless. It wasn't about seduction, it was war paint. She wore heels like armor, lipstick like a threat. She walked into that ballroom like a storm with a name, and every eye turned as she passed. He saw her immediately. Damien stood near the bar, holding a flute of champagne, mid-laugh. When his eyes landed on her, he choked. For a split second, his mask slipped. Then he smiled, that same dangerous grin, the one that once made her knees weak. It didn't work this time. She crossed the room slowly, every step echoing off marble, her heart steady. "Didn't expect to see you," he said, setting his drink down. "Oh, I know," she replied. "You never expect your ghost to walk in wearing heels." He laughed nervously. "You look stunning." "I know." She paused, looked him dead in the eye. "I hope you remember how to scream." And with that, she pulled out her phone, connected it to the ballroom's Bluetooth speaker system. She had planned every detail, every setting, every second. One tap, that's all it took. The audio played. At first it was soft, moans, whispers, names. Her voice. His voice. Arousal twisted with pain. Then it grew darker. "You're not leaving. You were begging for it. Scream again. No one will know the difference." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. Someone else turned away. Damien stood frozen, his face draining of color. And then Avery stepped up to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm, even. "What you just heard is real. It happened in room 508 at the Sterling Manor Hotel 3 weeks ago. That man, Damien Wolf, has done this to not just me but to dozens of women. Some bruised, some broken, some silenced, but not anymore." The room was still. She looked at him one last time. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, but he didn't move. He couldn't. "And for the record," she added, her voice slicing through the air, "we never begged." She dropped the mic and walked away. No hesitation. No fear, only power in her stride. Because Avery Quinn wasn't a victim anymore. She was the reckoning. The ballroom erupted in stunned silence, the kind that vibrated beneath the skin like an aftershock. The chandeliers seemed to tremble above, as though even the glass had heard the truth Avery unleashed. Damien stood amidst the wreckage of his reputation, surrounded by shattered gazes and dropped jaws, his face pale, his jaw tight, the smile he wore like a second skin nowhere to be found. People moved away from him like he carried a disease. His champagne glass, still in his hand, trembled. Celine, The woman from the photos, the woman who once posed with him in carefully curated perfection, had gone white. Her fingers slipped from his arm as though she'd just realized she'd been holding a flame all along. When she looked at Avery, there was no hatred in her eyes, only horror. Betrayal. Recognition. And that was the moment Avery knew she had done it. She had cracked the illusion. The recording still echoed faintly in the ballroom's speakers. Her own voice, raw and trembling, layered over Damien's venomous commands. It was like the final breath before a house collapses. And tonight, Avery had set fire to the entire structure. Damien lunged forward, reaching for her, his face contorting into something primal, something furious. But security intervened before he got within arm's length. Two men in black suits stepped between them, hands on his chest, forcing him back. "You set me up," he hissed. "You think anyone's going to believe this over me?" Avery didn't blink. "They already do." One of the security guards leaned in. "You need to leave, sir." Damien tried to argue, but the crowd had already turned. Whispers swirled around him like a storm, words like abuser, predator, liar bouncing from one shocked mouth to another. No one wanted to stand near him. No one defended him. Not even Celine, who had silently slipped out of the room, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. As he was dragged out, Avery stood still, not flinching, not shrinking. Her heels echoed on the marble as she walked toward the exit, not rushed, not shaken, but solid. Behind her, the crowd parted. Ahead of her, the door loomed like a portal to something entirely new. And when it closed behind her, she didn't look back. Not once. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. The streetlights cast golden halos across the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, traffic hummed, the world oblivious to the earthquake that had just unfolded inside. Avery pulled off her heels and walked barefoot to the corner, her pulse finally slowing, her chest rising and falling like a storm that had passed. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed. For the first time in weeks, she breathed like she was allowed to exist. Back in her apartment, she dropped the dress to the floor and stood in front of the mirror. Her makeup had smudged, her lipstick faded, her eyes bloodshot. But what stared back at her wasn't a broken woman. It wasn't a victim. It was the architect of reckoning. That night, she didn't sleep. She didn't toss or turn. She just lay in bed, her arms folded under her head, her mind looping through every moment, every word, every scream. Not with regret, but with release. She had screamed the night he touched her like a thief, but now she'd screamed in front of the world. And this time, it listened. Her phone buzzed around 3 a.m., the same cursed hour where everything had first gone wrong. She reached for it cautiously. Unknown number. One message. You thought it was over. Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, teeth clenched. She knew it was him. Even after the public humiliation, the exposure, the undeniable evidence, he still wasn't done. Still couldn't let her go. She didn't reply. Instead, she sat up and powered on her laptop. The next 3 hours were a blur of keystrokes and silent fury. She traced the number through a paid tracker, cross-referenced IP addresses, pinged locations. She didn't stop until she had a trail, not just to the text, but to Damien himself. An apartment registered under a different name, one he used before changing cities. But that wasn't what shocked her. What shocked her were the others. Buried in legal forums, old blog posts, private Reddit threads, and anonymous complaints were patterns. So many women with eerily similar stories. Same tactics, same type of charm, same trauma. Different names, different endings. Some didn't survive. One post, buried deep in a survivors forum from 2 years ago, read, "He told me no one would believe me, that I begged for it. I believed him. I still can't sleep. He had a scar on his back, shaped like a crescent. He said it was from a motorcycle, said I was lucky he picked me." Avery's hands trembled. It was him, the same line, the same lie. And suddenly she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. She reached out to the women from the red circle, her encrypted messages blunt and urgent. "We need to go bigger. This is no longer about revenge. This is about justice. Real justice. Not just a public shaming, but a courtroom, headlines, handcuffs." Some hesitated. Others replied instantly. "I'm in. Let's burn him to the ground. He almost ruined my life. It's time he pays." Within a week, they had a lawyer, a team, a strategy, a class action lawsuit. The files were massive. Hours of recordings, documents, surveillance footage, Digital forensics. Avery's security camera at her apartment caught the night of the rose. Another woman had audio of him threatening her in a parking garage. One had bruises documented at a hospital. Their lawyer told them, "Most abusers operate in shadows. You've dragged him into daylight. Now let's keep him there." Avery prepared her testimony with steady hands and a calm heart. When the court date finally arrived, she wore no red, just a black suit, hair pulled back, no lipstick, just truth. Inside the courtroom, Damien sat at the defendant's table, his suit crisp, his expression cold. But his eyes, they flickered when he saw her. Just a flash, the smallest tremor of uncertainty. And when Avery took the stand, the room went quiet. She spoke clearly. She didn't cry. She told them about room 508, the messages, the threat, the rose, the breathless escape. She ended with one line. "I screamed that night because I didn't know if I'd make it out. I'm screaming now because I did, and because too many didn't." The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Damien didn't look at her as he was cuffed, but Avery watched him. Watched him leave with none of the power he once weaponized. Watched the monster shrink into something pitiful and small. And when he was gone, she closed her eyes and exhaled. The scream was over. Now came the silence she had earned. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a tide receding after a storm. The echo of the verdict still lingered in the marble halls. Hushed whispers clinging to the air as reporters scribbled their final notes and legal teams packed away thick files, now heavy with closure. But Avery Quinn remained still, seated on the wooden bench just outside the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap, eyes trained on the double doors where Damien Wolfe had been led away in handcuffs only moments earlier. He hadn't looked back, not once. And that silence spoke volumes. Not regret, not remorse. Just fear. Pure. Concentrated fear from a man who had finally lost control. It should have been the end. But when Avery stepped outside into the gray light of afternoon, she didn't feel free. Not entirely. A part of her had expected a switch to flip, the grief to dissolve, the tension in her shoulders to lift, her soul to stand a little straighter. But instead, the weight still lingered, different now, heavier with understanding. Justice had been served. But healing was its own slow, unpredictable trial, and Avery wasn't the only one carrying the burden. That night, the Red Circle met in person for the first time, a rented conference room in a downtown hotel, neutral, discreet, quiet. One by one, the women arrived, some with their partners, some alone, some wearing confidence like armor, others hiding behind long sleeves and lowered gazes. Avery stood at the front, watching them enter, her heart thudding in a strange rhythm, part pride, part grief, part awe. There were 17 of them in total. 17 lives that had collided through shared trauma. Strangers woven together by pain and perseverance. They weren't all victims of Damien. Some had encountered men like him, predators dressed in perfume and promises, but every single one of them knew the language of survival. She cleared her throat and spoke. "I don't know if congratulations is the right word," Avery said, her voice steady but soft. "But today, we did something rare. We didn't just tell our stories, we made them matter." There was a silence in the room, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of what they had lived through, and more importantly, what they had refused to die from. One woman, Clara, raised her hand timidly. "What happens now?" Avery exhaled. "Now, we keep going." She walked over to the table and laid out folders. Inside were proposals, ideas, outlines, plans for something bigger than revenge. She'd spent nights drafting them, dreaming of what might come after fire and wreckage. A nonprofit, she explained, for victims of coercive control, assault, digital harassment. Women who don't just need a hotline, they need protection. Strategy, legal counsel, a place to land when the world tells them to get over it. The room stirred. Another woman, Tamara, asked, "But who's going to run it?" Avery hesitated, then smiled. "All of us." And so the Red Circle wasn't just a code name anymore. It became real. An organization registered within the month. They held fundraisers, seminars, partnered with shelters, created safe houses under aliases. They launched a podcast called Room 508, where survivors could share their stories anonymously. Raw, unfiltered, unashamed. It went viral within weeks. Avery's voice, once silenced behind closed doors, now echoed across headphones and speakers around the world. And when women heard it, they responded, not with pity, but solidarity. I thought I was alone. I didn't have the words until now. He did that to me too. From Singapore to Chicago to Cape Town, stories poured in. Some horrific, some unfinished, some ending in triumph. And every time Avery read them, she remembered the hotel room. The sheets, the knock at the door, the way she once mistook danger for desire. Now she saw clearly. But clarity didn't always equal peace. There were still nights she woke in a sweat. Dreams where the knock came again, where the phone buzzed with messages she couldn't delete. She kept a lamp beside her bed now, sturdy, just in case. Old habits from old wounds. But there were other nights too. Quieter ones. Nights where she fell asleep reading books again, or laughed until her ribs hurt while binging something stupid on TV. Evenings spent sipping tea in cafes without scanning the room for a threat. Mornings where she looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. She was healing. Not linearly, not perfectly, but honestly. One day she received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was shaky, but delicate. Inside was a single note. I never reported him. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but because of you, I think I finally can. Avery folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a small box under her bed, where she kept other things, old journals, a photo of her and her father before he left, her first passport, the now faded hotel room key from 508. That box was her archive. Not of trauma, but of proof. Proof that she had survived. That she had changed the world one scream at a time. Months passed. Then a year. Damien was still in prison, appealing every charge but failing. The media had grown tired, chasing newer scandals. The world moved on, as it always did. But for those in the red circle, the work continued. They had rescued 3 women from abusive situations, helped 4 prosecute their assailants, offered scholarships to 2 who had dropped out of school after their assaults. Real change. Real impact. One night, Avery walked past the Sterling Manor Hotel again. She didn't plan it. She had just left a dinner nearby, full of laughter and old friends who didn't treat her like glass anymore. But there it was, the entrance gleaming, the lobby glowing, the very same gold-chained concierge behind the desk. She walked in, not to check in, not to confront, just to see. She took the elevator to the 5th floor, her heels silent on the carpet. When the doors opened, she stepped out, pulse steady. Room 508 was still there. Same number, same door, same silence behind it. She walked up and placed her palm flat on the wood. For a moment she closed her eyes. She didn't feel pain. She felt power. Because she could walk away this time, and so she did. Down the hall, into the elevator, back into the life she had rebuilt with her own hands. Outside, the city was alive and bright. Neon signs and laughing voices and traffic horns blending into a familiar rhythm. Avery smiled. She didn't need a new name. She didn't need to erase the past. She had made it through. And not just through him, but through herself. The scream that once tore through the walls of room 508 had become something else entirely. A rallying cry. A revolution. A legacy. The morning light filtered through the cafe window, catching on the rim of Avery's coffee cup as she sat alone by the glass, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. The city outside buzzed with the start of another day. Cars honking, people crossing streets with coffee in hand, hurried conversations bouncing off brick and glass. It was a familiar sound now, no longer overwhelming, no longer something to fear. Just life. And she was living it again. Avery had come here every Friday for the past 6 weeks. Not out of routine, but out of peace. The small corner cafe was tucked away from the main roads, quiet but not empty, humming with just enough activity to make her feel connected. Today she had nothing on her calendar, no court dates, no interviews, no strategy calls with the red circle. Just a quiet morning with a journal and a steaming latte, and for once that was enough. As she flipped open the leather-bound book, her pen paused above the page. It was still strange, the absence of fear. Not because she missed it, but because she had lived with it for so long that its absence felt like a missing limb. There were still moments, flashes in the mirror, a heavy knock at the door, the buzz of a text from an unknown number that made her spine stiffen and her stomach drop. But those moments passed more quickly now, like fading storms. She began to write. Not about the pain. Not about Damien. Not about the trial or the media or even the women they had helped since. Today she wrote about the quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't laced with danger, but comfort. the kind that wrapped itself around her like a blanket rather than a cage. Survivor wasn't the right word anymore. She wasn't just someone who had lived through something. She had built something. From the ashes, from the screams, from the blood on her wrist and the trembling in her voice, she had risen. The cafe door opened with a soft chime, and she glanced up instinctively. It was nothing. Just a couple laughing over something private. A mother with her toddler. A delivery man carrying 3 boxes of croissants. All harmless, all human. Avery smiled faintly to herself, the tension in her shoulders melting a little more. Her phone buzzed on the table. For a second, her heart stuttered. Old habits. But it was just a text from Clara, one of the earliest members of the Red Circle. The shelter's opening next week. Ribbon cutting on Tuesday. You'll be there, right? Avery typed back. Wouldn't miss it. The shelter had taken nearly a year to fund and build. A transitional home for women escaping coercive relationships, equipped with security, childcare, legal support, and most importantly, empathy. The walls were painted in warm tones, the beds were soft, the doors locked from the inside. It was everything Avery wished she had when she needed it most. And now, it would be there for someone else. That evening, she walked through her apartment slowly, noticing details she'd once ignored. The way the light hit the photo frame of her and her younger sister, the softness of the rug beneath her feet, the faint scent of eucalyptus from the diffuser in the corner. Her space didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like home. She poured a glass of red wine and sat by the window, letting the city's glow dance across her face. The skyline was different now. Or maybe she was. The sharp edges had softened. The darkness had thinned. Even the memories that once came crashing like waves now floated gently, like driftwood, distant and manageable. She thought about the night in room 508, not with regret, not even with pain, but with clarity. It had been the moment she died and was reborn. The moment her silence shattered and her voice emerged louder than it had ever been. It wasn't about Damien anymore. He was behind bars, his name forever stained, his influence stripped away. He no longer held space in her life. He no longer got to live in her mind, rent-free. He was a footnote in the story of her transformation. She raised her glass toward the city as if toasting it. To beginnings, she whispered, and meant it. The next morning, she stood in front of a full auditorium of college students invited to speak during a campus safety and awareness week. She wore a navy blazer and jeans, minimal makeup, hair tied back. Nothing flashy, just real. The lights dimmed as she stepped up to the podium. She took a deep breath and looked at the crowd. So many young faces, curious, alert, some nervous, some hopeful, all listening. My name is Avery Quinn, she began, her voice steady, firm. And once, I mistook control for love. I mistook silence for safety. I thought if I just stayed quiet long enough, the pain would pass. But pain doesn't pass. It roots itself, unless you cut it out. She didn't read from a script. She didn't need to. Every word had been carved into her bones. I was manipulated, touched without permission, lied to, gaslit, threatened. Then I fought back. I screamed, and that scream echoed further than I ever imagined. The auditorium was completely still. Avery's eyes scanned the rows. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to tell you, you have the right to take up space, to say no, to walk away, to heal loudly, and if someone ever makes you feel small, ashamed, or afraid, know this, you are not alone. You never were. A girl in the front row wiped her cheeks silently. Avery smiled. After the talk, dozens lined up to speak to her. Some asked questions, others offered hugs. A few slipped notes into her hand and walked away without saying a word. She kept each one, every folded piece of paper, every scribbled name and number. She would reach out later, just like someone once had for her. That night, as she returned home and kicked off her shoes by the door, her voicemail pinged. One new message. She played it on speaker as she poured tea. A woman's voice, quiet but determined. I heard your story on the podcast. I think you did the same thing to me. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But if you have a minute, I'd really like to talk. Thank you for speaking, for making it okay to say it out loud. Avery stood still for a moment, the mug warm in her hands. Then she walked to her desk, sat down, and called back. Because that was who she had become now. Not just a survivor, not just a voice, but a lighthouse, a warning, a promise. And for every woman still trapped in silence, Avery Quinn would keep the light on. Avery Quinn's journey isn't just a story about survival. It's a powerful reminder of the strength we often don't know we have until we're forced to find it. In the face of betrayal, manipulation, and trauma, Avery showed us that even when our voices are stolen, they can be reclaimed. And when they are, they carry the power to heal, to inspire, and to create real change. This story teaches us that trauma doesn't define us. What defines us is how we rise from it. Avery could have remained silent. She could have let shame or fear consume her. But instead, she turned her pain into purpose. She built something not only for herself, but for others. Something that outlasted the scars and screamed louder than the silence ever could. We learn that justice isn't always immediate, but with courage, truth, and unity, it is possible. And we learn that healing is not about forgetting, it's about transforming. It's about facing the darkness, naming it, and choosing to walk forward anyway. Avery's scars didn't make her weaker, they made her a warrior. So if you've ever been hurt, silenced, or underestimated, know this: you are not alone. Your voice matters, and when you speak your truth, you light the way for someone else to do the same. Now I want to know, where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you feel seen, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share real stories, deep lessons, and the kind of truth that sticks with your soul. Your voice is welcome here. Your healing matters here. We're in this together.